War is terrible, but at least they're always fought far away by drones and robots. Not anymore. Wars are going to be fought right here, right now, by you and me. Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Thanks for joining us on our voyage to truth and freedom. Remember, every week we make an exclusive video for our supporters that you can access by clicking the link in the description. You also get early access to our content and you get to participate in our conversations with real journalists, brilliant thinkers and leaders that are opposed to the centralized authoritarian system that's threatening to take over all of our lives, is already crushing our free speech. Today we are talking about, well, it's quite serious actually. Numerous nations, including the one I live in, the United Kingdom, Sweden and Australia, are talking potentially about conscription. Conscription's a word that's almost slipped out of our vernacular to be replaced by words like subscription. Subscribe here, by the way. Conscribed here. That means you bloody well will subscribe whether you like it or not. That means that they are anticipating war being so extensive, so punishing and so fatal that people from the population, the civilian population, will be called into active armed service. This is something we thought we'd left behind along with fascism. Now, even though it's often the progressive left that are nominating nationalist or populist figures, charismatic orators as potential returns to the dark times of Hitler, Mussolini, Attell, apparently now tyranny and dictatorship may take on a slightly more bureaucratic hue and may yet deliver great vast wars, continental conflicts, as well as an idea that we thought we'd left behind in the 20th century, conscription. It's being spoken about. Are we being prepped for it? Are we being primed for it? Anyone that's been following the Ukraine-Russia conflict will know that it started with a professional army, moved towards a civilian army. Indeed, that's one of the catchphrases of the UK army. Wars are started by professional armies, ended by civilian armies. You'll have seen in the Ukraine that initially they started with a fresh young fighting force, but due to the fact that the members of the army kept, dying, they ended up with increasingly older guys in the army, leading to videos like this, where the fighting force was ultimately dads and middle-aged men. So could conscription be a reality in countries like yours and mine? And are we being primed and groomed to accept the idea of forever wars?
These recruits didn't choose the Swedish army. The army has started choosing them.
And given current global tensions, a defence expert reckons Australia should seriously consider bringing back a form of national service.
I have in the past thought that some form of conscription or national service could indeed be of a benefit for connecting people to the idea of service, even to the idea of tribe or nation. But now that the idea of nation seems to have been entirely corrupted by globalist ideas, now that democracy more and more seems like a sham, now that more and more the agenda of our nation seems to be so at odds with the agenda of the populations, now that nations seem so divided, it seems so bloody extraordinary that an idea like conscription would be discussed. And also, more worrying is there's a real likelihood that it will be for a war. The idea of conscription so we could participate in community projects, protect one another, feel integrated and connected in true communities of service and love, togetherness and unity, that seems like a fantastic idea. But marching into Moscow carrying a heavy backpack in the crosshairs of Vladimir Putin seems less attractive.
And amid NATO fears of an all-out war with Russia, he says Australia should be training new troops while we still have time.
So that's Australia. Again, remember, Australia we were regarded as a pretty laissez-faire, relaxed country until the pandemic, when we discovered that Australia can be pretty bloody strict. Over in the UK, similarly, the idea of conscription is being discussed.
Somebody who you'll know well, General Sir Patrick Saunders, I'm not sure if you served with him, but certainly you have served. You did. So he's suggesting, reading between the lines in the Telegraph today, that if we go to war with Russia, we could find that our youth may have to be conscripted. That's a bit alarming.
Yes, head of the British Army, one of the most cerebral thinkers that we've got, a strategist. We need to listen and listen carefully.
He said, "We will not be immune, and as the pre-war generation, we must similarly prepare. And that is a whole-of-nation undertaking. Ukraine brutally illustrates that regular armies start wars. Citizen armies win them."
And don't necessarily win them either. Now, what's startling about this, of course, is that we're talking about the idea of conscription. The idea of war with Russia has been spoken of as inevitable. Of course, Ukraine are already in a war with Russia, and many people have been cynical, doubtful, concerned about Western countries, your country, my country, funding that war, perpetuating that war, potentially at the expense of a diplomatic solution, which many of us know was on the table right at the dawn of this conflict and was somehow neglected, perhaps as a result result of an agenda not derived from the interests of Ukrainian people or Russian people. The idea that a civilian population from the UK or from Australia would be participating in this conflict without understanding what it's about, what the agenda is. Of course, what we're told in the legacy media again and again is that Vladimir Putin is a madman, that Russia has an expansionist agenda, that they're hell-bent on invading other, even though Ukraine isn't yet a NATO countries, and that we all have to be concerned about Russia as an aggressor. But elsewhere, Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, has admitted that they provoked Russia into this conflict openly and publicly.
President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021, and he actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. The opposite happened.
So do you want to actually personally fight in a war against Russia that could be avoided?
There are reasons why such a senior figure within the military would be saying this, and one of them is to reach the British public and remind them about the state of readiness in this country should the worst happen.
If you ask the people over 60, they would be up for it. Citizen Army, they would love that idea. For the younger generation, I don't think would be up for it.
Bobby Kennedy recently commented that baby boomers were at a disadvantage due to the nature of the media they consume. They consume state or corporate legacy media. Young people, far from being disinterested or uninterested or slothful or negligent of duty, simply consume media that makes them less inclined to give over their life, their attention, their will and their freedom to a state complex that they no longer trust, if they've ever trusted. And indeed, I think if you expose people of 50, 60, 70, 80 years of age to the truth about the origins of this war, the nature of who benefits from it, they would perhaps become a little more cynical. Again, the idea of having cohesive, community-oriented projects, the idea of unity, togetherness and purpose, I think are attractive to people of all ages. I simply don't trust the agenda or the direction of our governments when it comes to this conflict, when it comes to the pandemic, when it comes to globalism, basically on any subject.
But Jade, aged 25, disagrees.
Do you think your generation would kind of be ready to step up like that?
I think so, yeah. I think so. Although everybody would be scared, I think so. I think there's a lot of people that want to help now.
The questions that are asked are interesting, but what about the questions that are not asked? Why are we not discussing why would we have a war with Russia? What is the point of it? What are we trying to achieve? What is the transgression that Russia have enacted? Many people say, and legitimately perhaps, that it is a criminal war, that the ICC would judge Russia's invasion of Ukraine as criminal. And that may be and likely is true, but it's legislation that cannot be explored due to the many criminal wars that the United States have enacted in the past 10, 20, 30 years. The legislation itself has almost become defunct because all of the wars that America engage in are to some degree criminal. And the fundamental question here is, whose war is it? What is your relationship with the nation? Do you feel connected to the nation? Do you feel that you want to serve your nation as you see your public utilities stripped, as you see infrastructure in decline, as you see your health services, schools, all municipalities broken down, your water services, your electricity services sold overseas, overpriced, fuel prices going up, grocery prices going up? Who are you fighting for?
The UK is already involved in supporting multiple war efforts.
This war on Sesame Street's getting out of hand.
In Ukraine and elsewhere. And while the future of warfare may be unpredictable, the armed forces need people. Finding them is part of the mission.
There's one! Quick, grab him! Conscript him right now!
We've been too complacent. I think I've said this many times with you. What's coming over the horizon should shock us. It should worry us, and we are not prepared. We've had a couple of decades, 3 decades or so since the Cold War. Life has gone well.
Life has gone well. 9/11, financial crash, COVID. Time for a bit of conscription, I say. I have nothing but respect for people that operate within the services, whether that's the fire service, the police service, the military, health services, people that are willing to give their time and indeed their lives for a higher purpose, I believe are the finest kind of people, the very people around whom you have to build a society, without whom you don't have a society. But the idea that we sort of deserve a war now to celebrate, that we've all got satellite TV and PlayStation is pretty risible when there's a crisis of meaning, total lack of trust in all of our institutions, and a sense of a total breakdown of the cohesion in society.
It's now going to get more difficult as authoritarian states exploit our timidity.
Come on! Foreigners are looking at us and thinking that we're weak. Now get on a uniform and get out there and fight. What for? Who for? Oh, God. God, I've looked at it and it's basically for corruption and hypocrisy.
Perhaps reluctance to really put fires out. And the best example of that is a democracy on the corner of Eastern Europe.
Oh no, I've got some terrible news for you about Ukrainian democracy. One, they're shutting down all opposition media within the country. They're jailing journalists, and even their own citizens don't think it's democratic. They've done a deal with BlackRock to build the country after the war, where they will crush unions and that they'll create the first fully digital society. You've even seen Zelensky saying, we've done a deal with BlackRock.
We have already managed to attract attention and have cooperation with such giants as BlackRock, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs.
These kind of things are not speculative. They're not conspiracy theories. Ukrainian democracy is in trouble. They're right now doing investigations into corruption. Many of the weapons intended for Ukraine don't make it to Ukraine. So they're continually having to conduct internal investigations to ensure it can even really be called a democracy. I mean, I think they've scrapped all of their elections. How democratic can it be? So you can't just glibly say, we have to support Ukraine, they're a democracy, or you can say it, there is someone is saying it on the legacy media, but be aware that what you're saying is not true and therefore propaganda. And propaganda with the most nefarious of end, asking people to fight in someone else's war.
That, in its third year, is now in conflict, and we've not resolved that. So Patrick Saunders is saying, prepare for what's coming over the horizon. There is a 1939 feel to the world right now.
No, 1939, we're at it again. Instead of Hitler, it's Putin. This is not that. We don't have a genocide to oppose. We don't have an expansionist Nazi army. What we likely have are geopolitical rifts between the United States, Russia, and China, a set of crumbling alliances throughout Europe. Debt crises and crises of meaning abound, and an appetite to hold that whole thing together while domestic populations become increasingly despairing and distrusting of their governments.
These authoritarian states are rearming. There's a risk averseness about the West in wanting to deal with that.
Stop being so risk averse. Here's a gun. Maybe turn it against our own governments.
There's a mindset now of this era of insecurity that we're heading towards, but we're still on a peacetime defence budget of just 2%. That does need to change.
Oh, I get it. You just want some more money for defence contracts. Check out this guy's ties.
And the Red Sea is a great example that if you don't step forward, if you're not robust in dealing with those that are testing the envelope, it will be our weakness will be exploited, and it will affect our economy.
The old economy. It's extraordinary what's presented to us as reality, isn't it, these days? And what's presented to us as the kind of decisions that we have to make. To protect our economy, we should be conscripted. We've had it so good for the last 20 or 30 years. How many myths a man has to eat before breakfast to comply in this society?
So are you suggesting the defence budget should be up at 5% as it was during the Cold War?
It takes time to procure the ships, the planes, the tanks, and so forth. What we do need to do is quickly move to 2.5% and then eventually 3%. In the Cold War, it was about 4%. The equipment is good. It's just not enough to deal with all the threats that we're dealing with.
This is lobbying. How's that news? Hello, here's the news. Give some more money to the government. Do you want to pay more taxes? When you look at a conflict like Afghanistan or Iraq or the impending one in Iran, do you think, do you know what we need? More wars. When you look at the $2 trillion spent in Afghanistan, do you think we should do more of that? That was a good use of public expenditure. When you hear about those free service personnel dying tragically in Jordan, do you think we need more of this? Why is there not someone on the news right now saying, do you know what we need to do? We need to get over to Moscow right now and resolve this, flatten this out. What the hell are we doing? Ukraine now isn't even functioning as a democracy anymore, so the thing that we're protecting doesn't exist. It's bloody ridiculous. This is giddy escalation in the Middle East, and we're paying for it. Either it is some of our business and we should get out there and resolve it peacefully, or it's none of our business and we shouldn't get involved. What's this weird third option where we should spend a bunch of money making it worse?
Our world is no longer at peace. We're moving to a world at war. Britain absolutely has a role to play, but we need to upgrade our defence posture.
Essentially, that was a brightly lit, shiny floored way of telling you, give us your money and your children. I mean, that's a pretty heavy plea, isn't it? Can we just get to the weather? Here's the weather, climate change, and that's your fucking fault and all. Just to get you over the line, here's former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who literally personally went to Ukraine to scupper that was going to bring about peace between Russia and Ukraine, according to a Ukrainian diplomat, telling you that we should join the army. Oh my God.
Sir, Lance Corporal Johnson reporting for duty and responding to the appeal from General Sanders for a citizen army and encouraging young people across the country to think of the attractions, advantages of some kind of military training or service, because at the moment they think it's either uncool or unethical.
I think, actually, that people that join the army are fantastic and bold and brave. I spent time once with the Marines in the United States. Yeah, Camp Pendleton, baby. I've spent time around the military in this country. I've got friends from school that joined the services. I've nothing but respect for them. But the idea that young people should give their lives ultimately for a corporate, elitist, globalist agenda is risible. Use those values, use that desire for service to literally oppose these people.
Or perhaps they're not following General Sanders, they're following Colonel Sanders.
Especially that they've just admitted that they think you're bloody idiots that eat fast food all the time. So there you go, an old Etonian, Oxford graduate, former Prime Minister who belonged to the Bullingdon Club that smashed up restaurants for a laugh, named their club after a jail where working class people spend time incarcerated, often for the crime of being poor or addicted to drugs, which are, it could be argued, social and economic conditions in themselves, arguing that you should go straight out of the prisons or straight from the streets and into the war, and you should be paying more taxes to fund your own death. It's a pretty good system that they've got here. Don't go voting for anyone except those two centralised parties. Wouldn't want to tinker with this system now. Or could we have something a lot more beautiful, a lot more robust, a lot more powerful if we united against that very system and used this will, this verve, and these principles of individual sovereignty and community action to oppose them? I think yes. But that is just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments in the chat? Remember, we make an exclusive video every week. We give you early access if you're one of our supporters, and you get to join us for brilliant conversations with journalists like Michael Schellenberger or Whitney Webb. What I mean by journalists is people that attack the establishment in order to bring about freedom. Stay free. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.